Okay, so shall we start? Arjun, drive us.
Yes, hi. Sorry, a little bit late today. Let's take a look, just see if we have any housekeeping items. Let me see here. So we wanted to have a session today on roadmap, and I see Graham is here, great. And then we wanted to have some more focused sessions. The next one up was we were talking about having a SQL and FHIR and OMOP session. Wanted to get the sense of for folks if we wanted to see if we could do that next week or the week after. Anybody have thoughts on that?
Maybe let's vote in the chat. So I think it's better like to everybody calendars and.
Okay. Yeah. If you definitely want to attend, yeah, we could do. I could put up a poll for the next couple of weeks just to see if people have availability on that.
Working hours for that. So hope, yeah. You can read this task for I'm lazy guy. Yeah.
Okay, great. Sounds good. Great to see. It'll be great for progress on the test system. Ryan, I have a note here about spec changes from issues discussed. Is there anything, or can I get rid of that?
No, I think we got those clear. There's a couple open questions. I think mostly around clarifications, and so I did a couple pull requests and got some reviews and got those merged in. And it's all pretty minor stuff. I think there was one clarification around the behavior of nested unions that we had consensus on. So I updated the spec with that. And I think, yeah, there was one other clarification. I can't remember quite what it was, but I put that in as well. So I think we can work that one off.
Okay, great. Sounds good. I'll remove that to do. Other things that's been in the works, planning for dev days. And Ryan, I actually need your email address. It's probably why I've seen some emails going back and forth, but we've been just talking with FHIR, with Reen and Ward. They're very interested in having kind of a SQL and FHIR track. We haven't nailed down any specifics, but we talked about those sessions we were interested in. They're amenable to them. So
Arjun, we're gonna have Word next week meeting. So
that's great.
We can discuss next meeting the program on dev days. Yeah. So I invited him and he confirmed. So we will see him in a week.
Awesome, great. So we can have a discussion with the whole group about the dev days sessions. So sounds good. And that looks like that's it for housekeeping, sort of random tidbits and items. Anything outstanding on people's minds before we jump into a broader conversation about the roadmap?
Yeah, let's get sorry.
I have an outstanding task around intent of the view definition so that people can find ones that match their engines. And I will get to it this week. But also there's been some other changes that we discussed that might change that.
Graham, is that like a GitHub ticket or?
I don't know, it's a GitHub ticket. It was on your list of things.
I had you down for the FHIR and OMOP use case. I think that was the only one.
I'll dig it up.
Okay.
We had that for, but I don't think it'd be a GitHub issue yet.
Okay. Yeah, if you could surface that on Zulip, I may have lost it.
Yeah, I think there's been a few threads kind of revolving around this area. So yeah, maybe we need to bring those together because I think there's some sort of definition or specification of intent within the resource itself, and then kind of related to that is additional profiling that we'd have that might make requirements attached to an intent. For example, if a resource or if a view definition is intended to be quote unquote shareable, we were considering the option of using a profile for that resource to ensure that every field in there has a type associated with it and so on. Yeah, so I think there's this combination of a declarative intent and enumerating what those are, which I think is a little bit unclear, and then enforcing the characteristics that would go with the intent in the view definition in terms of a profile, and both of which are sort of open topics. But yeah, so maybe we need to make sure we have a ticket or a conversation to connect those two, so we can. I don't think we're going to work it all out today.
All right, something wrong with your microphone. So I don't know. It's noisy. Maybe you can try to fit it. It worked before, but now it's like robot voice.
It's a little cracked. Great. Yeah, I think there's a thread there that's still unresolved. Yeah, I could, if anybody wants to volunteer, just to summarize that and specify what the outstanding discussion is, that'd be helpful.
And I would love to see the session about SQL on FHIR on Spark from John, and if it's possible, I think it could be very interesting. We can dedicate one of these meetings or schedule another. If you guys are ready, I would love to participate in more details. I think Angelo just said that he's thinking that way, looking into this direction as well.
Yeah, I think it would be mostly John. Our implementation is really premature. So Yeah, sure. I'll get back to you on that. I'll coordinate with you, Arjun, to figure out what the best time would be to do that.
Okay, sounds good. I'll just make a note of it that, there's a demand for that session, so we just track it. So great. Any other housekeeping items, odds and ends before we dive in? Okay, so roadmap discussion. I do not have a draft for roadmap. I don't think anybody does. Let me know if you don't. If you do. Yeah, totally open-ended from my vantage point here. So what's a good way to get started? I will take any suggestion.
We've got that Google sheet that had the things we voted on for the V1 spec or whatever. I don't know if there's more in there that could become part of the broader roadmap.
Yeah, it's a good call out, Craig, but I don't know. Can pull it up. We can have folks pull it up.
At least I remember that we agreed that we can try to announce the draft of the spec at May Connectathon. So that's a good milestone for us. So we have 1 point on our roadmap. And then we can try to, work details from that. So what means that we're going to announce it on the May Connectathon. So we should publish the first draft. We should have few implementations. Yeah, what should be finished to publish draft, and then we can decide what should we do before and what we're gonna do after.
Yeah, so I think there's almost two sort of things. There's the core SQL on FHIR spec, they reach into other specifications, or they're sort of tangential to the actual view runner thing. But I've certainly got some ideas if you want me to kick it off.
Yeah, so sure. What would be some examples of outside the core that you're thinking of?
Well, one that's possibly in the SQL on FHIR spec is just how does this integrate into a FHIR server? So how do you tell a FHIR server to execute a view definition, for example? So do we start to think about an operation, or what are the touch points within the server API for this? So that's probably the first one I've got.
Maybe we should just, get them all out there, any that you have, but, in the same vein from anyone else as well. I think we should just put them out in a big list and start there. And so,
yeah, that's a good topic. So we already implemented something like this, but it's mostly implicit. So when you create the view definition, the view is created. But I agree that we should discuss maybe explicit operation is better, and management of some options. For example, we have options like we can create temporal table, a logged table, materialized view, non-materialized view, and users somehow should parameterize this. And
one thing that would be really useful as part of that operation is a way to find out whether a server would implement a view definition, not merely to just try and turn it on, but to find out whether there's any issues with doing so in advance. But for me, the single most important thing in the roadmap now is it's time, I think, looking at the work and the discussion, it's time to publish a first version and draw a line in the sand on that.
And do you mean that something should be in capability statement about
view definitions on this resource, or you don't have the rights, or something like that? But not to actually do it, just to find out whether it can be done.
I think it's kind of similar to topic definition, in a subscription specification.
Yeah, I guess. And we don't have a split between topic definition was created to allow systems to proactively declare some of the things that they'll do. Haven't really got that layer in view definition, and it's not obvious to me what it would be. And I wouldn't want to try and do that before publishing a first version, personally.
But Graham, what is your opinion? What should be into a first version of SQL on FHIR spec?
Well, what we have now, from my point of view, the view definition resource, the documentation we have, the things that people have tested, which the test cases should be in the published IG, but those, we have worked, as far as I can tell, we worked to a stable base with a set of test cases that multiple implementations pass. And so I think we should take what we've done and call that version 1. That's my opinion. I don't have any ambition for new features personally, and I wouldn't want maybe the view definition is going to run I'm supposed to do around declaring intent might make it into a first published version, but I wouldn't want to add new features that haven't been better tested beyond that.
It sounds like we all agree about the scope for the first version, and let's make it real. Yes, and I think that if we come with some implementation to Connectathon, that would be nice. Yeah, so we definitely will have reference implementation, and we will try to like pass the test by 8-box implementation, and we discussed with John that we can do the same with the puzzling. Yeah, and I don't know, Bashir or other guys. So let's maybe start coordinating and like passing tests and listing our implementation with the references. At least so that maybe we can really do tests during Connectathon, like invite other people to try that.
Yeah, so I think the biggest priority is probably the tests, and we've been working on tests. So I think we really just urgently need to figure out how to merge our efforts together. So Igor, if you like, maybe at some point we've got an open PR with additional tests in the JSON form at least, and we need to sort of integrate that with the mainline or whatever branch you guys are working on, so that we're not working cross purposes. And then I think it's only really a small number of topics to fill the gap to our original scope of testing. So that should really be our first priority. And once we have a plan for that, maybe we'll feel less guilty about talking about all this crazy stuff in the roadmap.
Yeah, okay, so let us incorporate the pull requests into the tests. So that's an item for Igor for this week. Yeah, and I don't know, you can push your tests the way you like. I don't know, let's discuss. So as a JSON, as a message in a Zulip chat, and we will incorporate it like manually, and then we will decide what is the best way for that. Just provide the content and we will incorporate. And eventually we can spend some time just together coding this JavaScript implementation and tests. And so if anybody wants to like contribute to that, so we can have a like group session, mob programming this part.
Yeah, we've definitely found a few issues. So maybe I should just create a whole bunch of threads.
Or tickets in repo. I think the ticket is even better because we can close them and assign them to Igor and Max. So we have 2 full-time programmers for that.
Awesome.
And John, you're probably going to do that anyway, but if you do open up a series of tickets on GitHub, just announce them as well so we can be aware on Zulip, so people might want to follow along.
And Graham, what is your implementation? Is it written in Java or?
Yes, written in Java.
Mm-hmm.
My implementation is written around basically a pipeline that takes resources in and produces rows out. And I'm not generating SQL. And then you could plug in row handlers. And I have a row handler for JSON for the tests and a row handler for SQLite for the publisher.
Mm-hmm. Is it part of publisher or is it a separate project?
It's in the Happy core.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's likely that when Happy do SQL on FHIR, they'll start at least using my engine, and then they'll look wider questions about how to do the integration. Mm-hmm. Like maybe they'll go the SQL route if that's something they want to do. I don't know. But a lot of those things, they start with my code. Mm-hmm. And then decide whether they're going to stick with the code or rewrite to suit their different architecture.
That's good. And Bashir, what is your status for V2 spec implementation?
So what we have is, I think, very similar to what Graham said. So it's basically, it's part of our pipeline, but it's as a separate library. So it takes like resources as input and a view definition and applies the view definition on the resources, and it's, outputs rows. In our particular use case, we use it to create like database tables, like Postgres specifically, but in general, it could be any relational database. But that's our relational database story. If people want to, this is a feature request that we usually have, that we don't want to deal with the Spark and Parquet. So give us an option that we can just use the database that we already have. And this is the option basically. So you can provide the view definition and then get materialized views.
This is a part of your project, this ETL pipelines.
Yeah. And it is open source. At the time that I started implementing this, I think I started in November. I didn't know that Graham also has an implementation. Otherwise, I would have probably tried to, do the, reuse and, improve. It's a complete separate implementation in our repo. Yeah, which I can actually paste the address for the repo here as well.
Yeah, please do. Or we have even like the JSON format to pull request your implementation. So if you can do this, please do so we will keep it in the repo.
Sorry, we have what? Sorry, can you repeat?
At the README of at the root of the project, there is implementation.json, and you can pull request or just push your JSON object with coordinates of your implementation. So, and we will eventually incorporate this into page with a matrix, and later we will add the test results and make it.
Sure, I'll do it.
Yeah, I think one of the most high value ways that anyone who's had a go at implementing this could do right now is actually just see about plugging in the test to what you've done, even if it doesn't pass the test. Just that exercise of plugging in the tests and having a go at running them will help us validate them, and I think stimulate more discussion around the hairy parts of the spec. I think that's going to really help us finalize what we've got.
And that could be the good goal for Connectathon. Yes, so we have at least now we listed like 5 implementations. So if we will collect all the test results from these implementations, even if they not pass, yeah, so that this is a good start.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's from my perspective, somebody who's, trying to get a view of all of the implementations, that's something I can help out with, is to just make sure that, the implementations that we have or we know about are, documented in the README and JSON, and help folks get connected. So, because people are certainly getting interested, and they're getting interested in the diversity of the implementations as well. So, I think that should definitely be a goal of the Connectathon, and work before that to get that list of a well curated list of the current implementations out there, with the approaches that they each are taking, and how they're running against the spec. So the test set. So I can help curate that as well. So on other items on roadmap items for the milestone 1 release. So we talked about the implementations, running them against the test set. What about the spec itself? I think there were some, there's definitely some rough edges in the spec itself. So I don't know if anybody has been thinking about taking on a pass on that. There's definitely some cleanup work. That's something I'd like to take on. So maybe I can help coordinate that if anybody's interested in taking a pass at, some of the narrative content of the spec. Because we still have a couple of pages about that are a little bit outside the core about, I think, columnar guidance and things like that. I think there's some rough edges there that I can take a crack at. I want to add some work just to make it a little bit more easier to digest. So the glossary and things like that. So how about I start up that conversation? And if anybody wants to join me and help with essentially edits, please let me know.
I think we need the group of proofreaders so they can test the implementation. Some of them can be outside of our group, because for us it's hard. So we're talking too long about this. We kind of understand by themselves. So it's hard to read when you prepare it. Yeah, I understand. So we can try to find like some test group of people who will first time see this spec and try to give us feedback. So if you can do this, Arjun, maybe in CQA, we can do in Health Samurai. So test on people who never read this spec and try to get feedback. So.
Yeah, I can see if
that's, I think, good contribution for guys like Joel, Angela, who just joined our group, so they can provide us a fresh look what's missed in spec.
I was going to go through it today just to get started. I put it in a ChatGPT earlier just to say, hey, summarize this for me. So to hit the high point. So I'd be happy to take a look anyway and see what I see.
Yeah, let's just decide on the technical flow. You can create issue, or you can report issues into Zulip chat. I think both of these will work, so Arjun will aggregate this, but yeah.
And I can do the same. I'm actually working on an implementation in Python that just sort of translates the view definitions into a SQL query that could be used by either Postgres or DuckDB or something. So I can also kind of go through it and
And you are in Google team, yes? So you're in a Rhine team, or Joel?
I'm at the Research Triangle Institute.
Oh, okay. It's one more implementation. Cool.
Also, definitely add it to the README once we get there. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, one question, Arjun, since you brought up this the columnar part of so is this supposed to be like that? Like one example of the data layer that we have discussed, because now since the focus has been mostly on view definition, it's not clear to me that, how does data spec actually fits into the SQL on FHIR spec in general? Because I mean, that's something that we are very much interested if we can also make it into a spec, like make it something that is agreed upon by different groups, like the columnar projection.
Right. I can have my own opinion here. I think this is in the guidance section of the spec. There's the columnar schema guidance and the JSON schema guidance. I don't know if it makes sense to keep them in the spec as is or potentially remove them and give them a new home. I haven't looked at them in some time, so that could be a discussion point for us in terms of, there could be some broader edits to the spec too, I think in some ways. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? The columnar schema guidance page and the JSON schema guidance page.
I think it's a little bit confusing that we've got this sort of data layer agnostic thing here, but then we've got talking about the data layer. So anything we can do to sort of make that more separate or more clear, I think would be good.
Yeah, I actually agree with that point as well. I mean, we have these layers page, which describes this, view layer and data layer. So maybe it's just a matter of organization. I believe a few months ago, I brought this up, maybe, 4 or 5 months ago. And I think at the time, the consensus was that, this is more about the data layer, which we are not going to touch for a while. And if it's still, that's the consensus, then maybe we should clarify this, that, most of the things that are currently in the spec is about the view layer. And these are and then very clearly saying that, by the way, regarding data layer, these are the options which are just guidance. So these are not part of the spec.
Yeah, +1, I think that it does feel, I think there's some good content in there because I think some of that guidance could be useful for folks trying to implement it. But yeah, we should be probably, I don't know if we want to move it to an appendix section or something like that, and it may make it very clear implementers guidance or that sort of thing. Basically, make us, clearly, I mean, it's not sort of front and center as it is now because it is more of an appendix. Yeah, and so yeah, +1 to that.
And I think it will depend on how we're gonna be normative, because so we see that the view definition is more mature than the schema stuff, and otherwise, if we decide to publish them together, yes, they both should be at the same level of maturity.
I mean, I think the intention with the schema stuff is it just provides options or guidance, which I mean, and you can do something totally different than the schema and still be compliant with the spec, which is probably another area I want to be more clear on. Is here's some things. I think there's some reasonable content and things implementers can do in this space to include, but yeah, it's not a requirement of the spec. It's more of some suggestions for implementations, but we need to make sure that that's very clear in the documentation.
But because for me, the first application could be bulk export as a part, and then this recommendation will turn into standard, to be honest, if people start implementing.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it will become de facto, not the Euro standard, but de facto standard. So, and I would be kind of careful about this. Yeah, we can publish it as a recommendation or just a sample, but eventually, I don't know. And I see a lot of interest in the bulk export community in the Parquet format, and then everything will be clear. Yeah. So, but we can kind of be umbrella for this stuff, so that our working group, and but we can create another repo and start contributing this schema and discussing, and we can refer this project from SQL on FHIR as a recommendation, and then probably guys from bulk export will refer it as a I don't know, some requirement.
Yeah, so seems we talked about bulk data. The other way to do it is to integrate the view definition with the bulk data operations, so that I can say, give me a bulk data export using this view definition, and then give me the result of that as Parquet or CSV or whatever. So that actually keeps the implementation details under the hood of the implementation, and you get your bespoke extract. And in some ways that addresses potentially some of the problems with the bulk data spec currently, where it's really costly to produce a bulk extract because you've got to serialize enormous amounts of data and deliver them. But if you're just asking for what you want and you've got an efficient view under the hood that's sort of converting that to SQL or whatever, that might be really useful.
And I think Dan has a perspective on how it can be done. First, I think we should publish view definition as a spec, and then we can collaborate with a bulk export, bulk API group.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with kind of both both approaches that were just discussed. I really like the bulk idea. I know we've talked about that a couple times around kind of using view definitions to avoid kind of serializing into FHIR and then serializing back into something flat. And so I think that's a great idea, and there ought to be a way. Maybe this is the kind of version 2 or like a second, once we have a core spec published, but a way to write view definition resources to a server and then reference them in an export. So I like that idea a lot. But I also, from a Parquet perspective, I mean, there are folks who are really interested in storing FHIR in the data lake in Parquet. And so this is a little outside my area, so I'll defer to the experts like you, John, and Bashir. But like, it does seem like having some guidelines around standard approaches to generating that Parquet, and having, like what you do with extensions, and trying to see if people can agree on a way to kind of address that in a manner where you could then build tooling on top of these different Parquet implementations that could run across them. I agree that doesn't feel exactly like it belongs in bulk, and it doesn't feel like it exactly belongs in kind of the same spec as the view definitions, but it does feel like something that would be a good community spec to me. But I'll defer to the Parquet experts on that too.
To me, it's a big topic. It requires a lot more discussion than we've given it. It's a little bit less fertile ground for standardization, in my opinion, because it's closer to, there's not really one perfect generalized way to do it, even though, like, for example, we've implemented a generalized way of doing it, but we are looking at things like, but there's compromises there, and we're looking at things like implementation guides, specific schemas, and that sort of stuff, in addition to what we've done, just to make it even more closer to the use case that you're using it for. So I think it's a little bit less suited for standardization. Like it's going to be tricky, and it's a whole nother sort of discussion area. Bashir, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I guess, for your first point, having this, view definition being actually fed into the bulk export, I think that's actually a very nice idea. But I think, on the other hand, I think maybe the best thing is to have both, meaning that I guess I a little bit disagree with your last point, that if we want to support Parquet as a format, that, if someone wants to export everything that is in FHIR into Parquet format, then I think we need a standard. I guess your point is that maybe it's not easy to define that standard. And I agree with that. I mean, that there are a lot of details and nuances that, when you want to convert to Parquet, that comes into the picture. But unless that standard is defined, Parquet cannot be a standard for bulk export. If we say that, it's a good idea to have Parquet as a bulk export output, then we need to define the standard. Now, just as a side note, because, for the last few weeks, I have been dealing with this. So the main bottleneck that we have in our pipeline, basically, analytics formats, basically, is reading from the FHIR server, obviously. So the database is the slowest part. Now, I have recently implemented a feature that if you want to, let's say, recreate a view, then if you do it from the FHIR server, let's say this is similar to doing a bulk export and then apply a view on top of it, right? It's like 20 or 30 times slower, but an order of magnitude is slower compared to where you start from Parquet, read the Parquet, apply the view on that, and then create your material list. Why am I bringing this? Is, I think, another reason. I think it's having Parquet as a format for bulk export output. I think that's a very useful idea. So
yeah, I agree. Sorry, John.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, I actually do agree with that. And you're right. I was conflating two different things. Like, it is certainly possible to create sort of a close to lossless rendering of FHIR in Parquet for passing data around. And then if you want to sort of transform that into whatever for ultimate performance, once it gets there, then that's a separate consideration. So yeah, you're absolutely right, and I agree with you.
And I have a name for this project. Let's call it FHIR on Parquet, and let's start it. So Bashir, let's maybe create the repo and start the discussion of the schema. And I think John can contribute initial stuff, and you. And I would love to join too. I play it a lot with the Parquet and FHIR as well, so I would love to contribute to that.
Sure. And by the way, in terms of repos, so we used to have this SQL on FHIR, like the one that we call now V1. And now it has like a deprecation notice everywhere in it, which says that, this is probably going to be moved in here. So I think it would be nice at some point, not too far in the future, we make a decision what's the home for this spec. This spec being, how do you project like FHIR resources into like a columnar format. Whether it's the old repo, whether it's a new repo,
If we take like a little bit narrow, let's say FHIR on Parquet, and this is a very nice like border for that. It's like between two standards like Parquet and the FHIR, and this is just a like discussion of the schema. And then if somebody will decide to make something bigger, like all columnar stuff, then it's going to be another spec. Because I think this is nice spec, which we can refer from SQL on FHIR and from bulk export and from some other places. So it looks like a nice ball, like sphere, so which can be done. And we can ask Josh to create this repo and start contributing there. So finally, it should be just Parquet schema and some recommendations, yes? And maybe...
Yeah, I agree. I think it'd be really great if we could sort of separate that somehow and just have a meeting sometime in the future to start off a discussion just focused around that.
I can make that a note about that. I think that'd be a great idea. And I think we're, honing in on, let's see, a thumbs up from Dan, honing in on, a separate repo and a separate spec / around Parquet in particular. And I think that solves one of our issues here. And this seems like then the columnar schema guidance can just be a reference to that new spec. And that's where the home will be for that content. So it kind of kills two birds with one stone there, but it's an exciting project on its own as well. So that sounds good. We also have the JSON schema guidance page, and I think this is, if I'm reading it right here, it's not, this I think is more about what we call the data layer, sort of the input layer but the columnar schema guidance is really about the output. Is that what other people are getting from it? This is sort of an early pass at where we're talking about optimization or queryability and things like that, not really transformations from FHIR to JSON. Is everybody agree with that? We're talking about
as I remember, so we discussed different options, and finally we decided almost keeping FHIR as is, maybe some not sugar but convention how the reference can be pre-parsed. So finally, as I remember, the only pre-parsed references that the point everybody agreed. So, I don't know, Dan, do you remember? So that it's quite simple. So I don't know. We can keep a small page about this, how you if you have a JSON storage, native JSON storage, what you can do in implementation, like pre-parse references.
I think we could even include parts of this inline and just kind of say like, if you're annotating your underlying FHIR data, you might want to kind of pre-process some of these references so that the queries in the view layer happen, more efficiently. But I don't know that we need a whole page dedicated to it, since the standardization of that matters less, since we've kind of moved some of that functionality up the stack a little bit. I can take a look in the next week or two, kind of go back into the spec and try to sort through what we still have there, and whether we want to take it out or put it on a different page or just keep that page as is. I have to look at it again.
Yeah, I agree. It could be like best practice or recommendations page where we will refer, let's say, the Parquet schema and discuss how it can be stored in JSON, just a set of recommendations and like cross references. So
yeah, I think there's probably some elements that still have value, but I do think a lot of it has moved to the view layer. So yeah, Dan, if you have a chance, I'll put a to-do down for you on that to review the JSON schema guidance page and take a look and see what needs to be moved, what can just be eliminated, what's left. So
that's probably worth to document this as a part of this helper function, like get key and like motivation why this function appear here and what could be inside. Yeah. So that would be nice. So when we document these FHIR pass functions, the history why they exist and how it may work under the hood. So yeah, that would be nice as well in the spec.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this will just be eliminated. That's just looking through it really quickly because it has already been incorporated in the rest of the spec. So see what's available there, and but I tend to think it's probably we should just, I'm leaning towards probably just eliminating it and moving it into incorporating it into the rest of the spec. And then it'll become more normative and better reviewed. Okay, so anything else on spec structure as we are continuing to talk about it? There's a couple of odds and ends, tech matrix. I can start to take a look at that more closely. Maybe definitely some work on the narrative, proofreading. I'd like to incorporate the glossary I've been working on. What I've been trying to do is create sort of concise descriptions of some of these concepts and use them consistently, and something that we can refer to, as we talk about the spec, as we give presentations. Nikolai, myself and Ryan, all gave sort of slightly different interpretations of things. It'd be great to have something consistent that people can rally around and reuse. So that's the goal there. So I'll post the link to the glossary again so people get a chance to look at it, and then eventually incorporate it into the spec.
Mm-hmm. What I can suggest, maybe we can create like a Google Doc and work on this together.
The glossary itself or something else?
I mean, for some pages, and like iterate a little bit quicker than we through the GitHub.
Or yeah, that's I would have to, I can do pull requests and things like that, but I have to set that up. So, and then I don't really have any of the publishing infrastructure. So, I'd sort of be doing it a little bit blind. We could do Google Docs, just to iterate faster on some of this content. John, you have your hand up.
Yeah, the only other thing that I thought of was, and I'm not sure if this is sort of part of the first version or not, but just thinking about what Grahame said before, if the goal is to sort of round this view definition spec out and make it usable and make it adoptable within things like, so, you could actually include a view definition or a set of view definitions within an, and then that begs the question, well, how do people do that? And do we sort of have like a view definition validator role in addition to a view definition runner role? Does the IG publisher support the validation and sort of publication of these view definitions within, and how does that all work?
Mm-hmm.
There is a simple answer because we have a reference implementation which can do the validation as well. So not sure it can be easily incorporated, but at least we have it and it should work, and we're going to use it, yes, for that, and even write tests for that. So that could be the first answer, but yeah, probably we can separate like validation role. And I think most of people will think that validation should be done by generic like FHIR validation engines when we publish structure definition.
Well, part of it can, right? Mm-hmm. But there's also semantics inside. So we can validate this sort of outer view definition using a generic validator, but then there's sort of semantics inside that also need to be validated if you want to do a complete job, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good idea, but I think probably having like working validator in JavaScript even better for community. Yeah, not just a spec that it could be like validation role, but just working validator. Like we see that the FHIR community like using only one validator most of the time. Yes, and this is. It works like this approach, and probably the same will work for SQL and FHIR.
John, are you thinking that there's any to-do or sort of deliverable in terms of that in the shorter term?
I think we need a ticket for it, like as a placeholder for some work to do there. Like maybe it's what Grahame's already done. So Grahame's already done some work implementing it and using it for other things inside the IG builder. Maybe it's an expansion of that. I'm also thinking about, like the publication of it. So it actually would need to form part of the documentation of an IG as well. So that's another piece. But yeah, maybe I can just create a ticket for it at this stage. So there's a placeholder there.
Yeah, I think that's a good start. There we go. That's a roadmap item right there. So we got at least one of them down. Okay, we're coming up to the hour. So I want to just make sure anyone had any last minute comments or thoughts or things want to get onto the list.
I think that John proposed like validator role in the spec as well, maybe worth to consider. So that it mostly will validate FHIR pass stuff, yes, and some invariants like unions should have the same set of columns. So that it's quite enough logic, yes, to maybe introduce the validator role, like engine role and the validator in the spec and describe it. Because as we see in other IGs, it's quite often people introduce different roles, yes, and which can be implemented by different software.
When you say validator role, you mean?
This is engine which just validate view definition for consistency.
Got it. But that wouldn't, I mean, would that be, and you would say document that in the spec?
That's a potential artifact which people can.
As a potential artifact.
So that like engine, you may implement engine which run the view definition, flatten. So we can even probably document that there could be two type of engines, like in memory flow style, yes, like JavaScript, Grams, and other guys, and some more sophisticated like FHIR native database engines.
And it could also do what Grahame was asking for as well, like, can I run this view definition? And depending on whether we have optional features, we might want to tighten that up a bit, so if there's features of the spec that may or may not be implemented, that might play a role there as well.
I mean, it sounds like something we should at least track. So I'll put that down as a to-do item to track, the concept around a validator role for engines and potentially checking for optional features. Okay. All right. So we're a little over time. So it sounds like we got a couple of to-do items, some roadmap map items. So excited about that. So, okay. I think we can call it for today.
Thank you guys. Bye.
Thanks everybody.